Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It's been a great event so far, and we've really enjoyed having all of you. I think I know many of you in the audience today, but my name is Chiraag, and I'm a member of the Infrastructure Software Investment Team here at Battery. I'm honored here to welcome our next speaker, Hatim Shafique, who is Chief Customer Officer at Databricks. Hatim has more than 14 years of experience building enterprise software products. Prior to Databricks, he served as Chief Customer Officer at AppDynamics. And we're excited for his talk today, comparing customer success strategies between serving on-prem clients and clients leveraging a cloud product, and also the critical role of customer success in driving revenue growth as the world moves from on-prem to subscription to consumption-based pricing. Hatim, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chiraag. First of all, let me thank Battery Ventures and you all for this opportunity. Really excited and looking forward to this next 30 minutes and an exciting discussion. I have some prepared presentation slides that I'll run through, and I'll keep enough time towards the end for Q&A. If you want to move to the next slide. Before I sort of get into the meat of the presentation, wanted to start with two things. One is, I do think the enterprise software world has changed over the last 10 years, to say the least. And what has essentially, one of the big pieces that has changed is how customers buy enterprise software, how they actually adopt it, and how they get successful on those platforms. And with that, the scope and the position of what customer success and the role that customer success plays in that journey has significantly evolved over the last 10 years, especially over the last 5 years, as we've kind of moved more into the consumption economy as well. So, primarily, customer success has kind of moved from just playing a role in driving support and customer CSAT and so on and so forth, to actually playing a very active role in helping customers adopt the software. And that's where the mission statement comes in. I strongly believe, and we used to have the statement in AppDynamics that holds true over here as well, is customer success truly is one of the core functions driving both the success for our customers, but also the top line growth for the company that they are a part of. And so that plays into the mission statement here. And I do believe the mission statement really is important for any customer success organization. So, founders, chief customer officers, CEOs should think carefully as they design the mission statement for their customer success organizations, because that really drives what role your customer success team will play in the customer lifecycle and the adoption journey, but also how they get incented, what kind of people are you going to be able to hire in those teams, and so on and so forth. So I've kind of broken it up as I see it in three parts. One, and I think the first and foremost is how do you actually help accelerate the value for customers, and then accelerate as a result of that the land and expand motion, which is driving and accelerating the expands. The second piece, which I think has been the core mission for any customer success organization, still continues, which is customer success still needs to continue driving CSAT. They need to be enabling customers to adopt the product, and they need to be able to essentially bridge the gap between where the product sits and where the adoption journey sits. And then lastly, this is also a core mission for the customer success organization, is making sure that they are guarding against churn, and that they are actually helping customers both consume the contracts, but also get value from the platform, so that they can continue driving the renewal. Next slide. So just before I get into what I think about customer success evolution, I wanted to just spend a minute talking about what the experience was building a customer success organization for a hybrid company like AppDynamics, which had both on-prem as well as SaaS customers, and then working and building a customer success organization for Databricks that is a pure SaaS consumption-based company. I think the primary difference is that in AppDynamics, we did have to make sure that our support and services muscles are very strong. And primarily that was driven by the fact that it is a little bit more challenging to support customers that are on-prem. You have to make sure that you have the necessary programs to be able to troubleshoot issues, in deployments that are behind their firewall in their environments. You have to make sure that you have the necessary visibility into the product to be able to get to the RCAs quickly so they can uphold the SLAs. You also have to make sure the services arm is very strong, because you have to maintain and manage these deployments that might be scaling over time. So in AppDynamics, outside of making sure that we had the right CSAT enablement and other programs, we had to make sure support and services was very strong. And I think in Databricks, as customer success itself has evolved, in addition to being, having support and enablement programs, our core focus is very much on driving adoption. So we try to figure out how do we actually build CS programs that will help drive consumption of the customers' consumption against the contract, as well as accelerate the value for those customers through use cases and other scenarios, so that we can continue picking up new use cases and things that we can help customers drive, helping them adopt this product across from one business unit to multiple business units, as and eventually hopefully becoming a standard across that organization for, in this case, for Databricks, for data. Next slide, please. So, I call it customer success 2.0. I think, it is, in some sense, a term that's pretty well known across the industry. First of all, I wanted to clarify that I think that this onboarding to expand cycle is a continuum, that it continues happening in this organization. So this whole concept of pre-sales and post-sales the lines have blurred over time, because essentially every account is going through this motion of onboarding all the way to expand, and then going back to onboarding a new use case throughout their life cycle. As I said earlier, you might have landed in a particular business unit or a particular team, and then after you make them successful, a new team or a business unit picks you up, and then that cycle continues in that organization. I have put in some building blocks over here that I think are very critical as you think about building customer success organization. I also think about building them in the sequence as I've layered this. So, for a new company that's just starting off, thinking about building a post-sales customer success organization, support is primary and the absolute important thing. You have to make sure your customers, especially in cases of enterprise software, have the right ability to get support. Especially if they're driving critical workloads in production, they have the ability to get 24/7 support. You have a proper SLA motion around that. After that, thinking about how is the renewal motion going to work out is really, really important. Then thinking about advocacy and enablement, it is really important in the adoption journey to make sure that, in some sense, your programs are creating a groundswell and are actually engaging users and making those users that are daily users of your platform very, very successful. And there are enough enablement and engagement opportunities for them to be able to be nurtured. And eventually, hopefully, they all become champions of your product. And as they move from one company to another, they actually take your product and those recommendations along with them, right? So, you want to eventually make them lifetime champions, and those programs are kind of driven towards that. And then finally, I think that the primary piece kind of fits in on top of that. Everything is that you want to have a customer success motion that helps you drive onboarding, the necessary services, and the right strategic programs that are actually going to be growth levers across all of these different building blocks as you think about kind of maturing your customer success motion as your company evolves and as your customers and your book of business evolves. Next slide, please. One of the other things that has happened, as I just mentioned, is the lines have blurred between sales and customer success. I in some sense, think in a SaaS consumption world, everybody is in customer success, especially in the go-to-market team. Because if you have a great product and you have a great go-to-market organization that's very driven and leading with customer success as their primary motivation, and they are doing everything they can from right from making sure that the gap or the bridge between the product and the adoption is fulfilled, that we are building the right relationships in those accounts, that we have the right enablement programs, that we are actually thinking about accelerating value for the customers, then eventually, the flywheel of that consumption leading to additional expands, leading to more consumption, starts spinning in these accounts, and then you just basically take off. So, I mean, here in the slide, I just want to kind of um, have 2 points that you can take away. One is think about mapping out your journey of what it takes for a customer to actually adopt your product into finer milestones, and then think about how can your go-to-market organization play different roles in the different parts of the journey to actually help achieve those milestones, and then also make sure that there are strong integrations and handoff points that are built in, either through process or automation or both, where balls are not being dropped as handoff is happening for that particular customer, that use case across these milestones. So think about what your elaborate journey is. What are the different milestones that are success criteria? How do you measure those milestones? What are those leading indicators that will eventually lead to more consumption and expands? Think about the RACI for your team, and then make sure that that RACI is well integrated in terms of handoff points, so that your whole go-to-market team can play together in actually driving this land to expand journey for your customers. Next slide, please. One more thing that's really, really important, especially if your business is growing really, really fast, and you aren't just able to keep up with the amount of demand that's coming at you, is making sure that you have some programs that can actually help you drive scale. So I've kind of put in 4 building blocks as I see the world. One is you absolutely have to have the ability to engage your users, right? So in some form of workshops, one-to-many style workshops, user groups, product roadmap sessions, things that you actually need to do to help customers one-to-many style, where they can engage and they can collaborate together. That goes in hand with customer communities, right? So you can start with, if you're a smaller organization and don't have a lot of resources to launch a full-blown community, I would definitely say that putting in some investments into actually just having some user groups that can be self-enabled, or be customer run, and having workshops and product roadmap sessions, one-to-many style, will help. You can eventually mature towards getting a full-blown customer community launch. And then there are 2 other building blocks. One is I think people learn very differently now. It's harder for people to carve out time for many hours or many days, one at a time, at any given time, to just sit into a class where the instructor is actually delivering particular content. People like to learn self-service, and then they would like to have some kind of mechanism where they can ask questions, right? So I think your investments in terms of education have to kind of cater to that audience, especially the technical audience. If your product is actually requires deep technical expertise, and you need to ramp up users for that specific thing, having self-service training, making sure that self-service training is bite-sized, and that is combined with some kind of certification, as well as some kind of a help channel, is really, really important. Making sure that you have that program that can allow you to scale across hundreds of users or thousands of users, as your company and your customer base scales. And then the last thing is thinking about just how, and this pyramid over here kind of talks about that. You might not have resources to be able to actually assign the named resource to every single account, right? You might have a strategy where you're assigning a named customer success resource only to the top tier customers that are over a certain threshold. Generally, that book of business is 60 to 70%. You probably have a strategy, or would build a strategy of having pooled resources, where you have 1 to 40 to 50 accounts per customer success person. And then you also have to, along the way, build a self-service mechanism. So you have to build scaled onboarding in terms of digital onboarding. How do you think about ramping up customers more through automation tools and through personalization. I think Jeff was talking about this in the prior chat, and I think data plays an important role. Learning what customers or users are doing on your product, and obviously anonymizing that data, but then using that data in some anonymous fashion to be able to personalize the onboarding journey for these users will go a long way. And then the more of it you can do inside the product, the better it is, right? So, the point here is you can think about these building blocks as you think about scaling customer success. It is good to think about investing in these programs early on, and then you might want to think about a customer success allocation or assignment strategy based on some kind of a tiered model like this, where you have named customer success representatives assigned to your top tier accounts, but then you have a pooled as well as self-service strategy for the long tail, high velocity accounts. Next slide, please. Just as before I wrap up, think about. I think measuring customer success is really, really, really important. I think, as I mentioned earlier, as the customer success field and function has evolved over time, the metrics that are being measured inside customer success have also evolved. Obviously, you want to measure customer CSAT. You want to measure NPS. You want to measure some of those things, but they don't necessarily tell you or give you the whole picture. So it's really important to actually build metrics that are going to be leading indicators for your business instead of lagging indicators for your business. So most of the times, right, you might only be measuring CSAT and NPS and some lagging indicators, right, like renewal rate or the net retention in your book of business. But those are all lagging indicators. You have to build some other indicators that help you drive accountability in your teams, as well as measure and drive investments and success in particular programs that you are going to launch along the way. So on the top left-hand side or the left-hand side, you have two types of health scores, as I see it. One is just a health status of red, amber, green, which is what is the state of the account or this customer at this particular moment. And then the one above, which we're calling customer maturity, is more about what is the state of this customer from a maturity perspective, from a long-term view. How well entrenched are you in the customer's organization? Do you have enough champions? Are they using you across multiple teams and multiple business units? And it could be possible that an account is actually in a high maturity state, but red at the moment. And it probably is red at the moment because there's a Sub-Zero issue open in that particular that is impacting that particular customer that your teams are working on resolving. So you absolutely want to make sure that the maturity score of that customer, especially as the customer goes through the first year of the land to expand in the future years, continues to increase so that you are well entrenched and well established in the customer's organization. One of the other indicators could be how sticky are your workloads? Have you actually won the architecture battle in that account, and have you established yourself as a as a critical tool in the architecture, right? So all of those things go in customer maturity, and then just in time, things like how many support issues are open, or maybe a champion left, and you have to kind of now relaunch a program to rebuild a new champion. All of those go into the health status. And then on the right hand side are some metrics that are probably important for the business. I do definitely see the number of use cases and workloads that you're driving, as well as the consumption that the customer and the growth in the consumption of that customer are leading indicators. And then there are some lagging indicators, as I mentioned, which are net retention rate and renewal rate and so on and so forth. Thinking through what you want as an outcome from customer success, and then building both leading and lagging indicators around it is kind of the upshot here. And every business is very different. So these are sort of just some ideas that you can then customize for your own business and your own book of business for your end customers. Last slide, please. So just in summary, before we kind of open it up for questions, just some closing remarks here. One, as I mentioned through the presentation, I think customer success does play a very, very big role, especially as the SaaS enterprise consumption-based world has evolved over the last 5 years, and in some sense, it's a very much of team sport. And I would highly encourage all of the founders, CEOs, business owners over here to think about customer success early on and build a muscle around that. Start investing in those building blocks so you can drive the success of your customers as well as fuel the growth of your business long term. Accelerating value for those customers and thinking about just growth programs and thinking about how do you actually get more ROI from your customer success teams by gearing those programs towards growth is another aspect. And then think about scale over time. Think about self-service courses. Think about shared success. Think about communities and how do you actually get users and customers successful at scale, especially high velocity customers that might not need a high touch, customer success person is important. So with that, those were the prepared remarks. I will hand it off to Chirag again to take questions, and then love to kind of get into a discussion here.
Thanks, Hatim. Really appreciate that. That was fantastic. We did get a lot of questions this time around, so we'll try to get through as much as we can. And for those that we can't, we'll try to circle back with Hatim afterwards and maybe circulate those answers. But the first one, how and when do you pull in other departments to help out with any customer success issues, either upstream to product when you need engineering help, or downstream to sales as you think about expanding customer LTVs? How do you think about that interfacing with the other organizations?
Yep. So just thinking about that life cycle, right? That I had built in terms of milestones. The way we do it here, and the way I've kind of seen it be very successful in terms of collaboration, is in terms of role ownership. It's really important to make sure the role ownership is very well defined. And the way we have kind of defined the ownerships, within Databricks is that sales teams are very much responsible for hunting, right? They are essentially kind of driving all of the things that we need to do in terms of finding new use cases, finding new teams, essentially figuring out how to run a strong POV cycle in case we need to do a demo and prove ourselves in a new team. And then once that's done, then making sure that that particular use case goes into production, and how that is done, which is the building, development, and moving to production of that particular use case, is kind of driven by the customer success team. And then think about this continuum, right? That keeps on going. So depending on where the issue is, right? If there is an issue with a new team just trying out the product, then obviously it goes into the sales team, right? Into the solution architecture team and the sales account representative on the account. If it is very much to do with an existing use case that is, in the development cycle that's going to go in production, then that is driven by the customer success team. As far as support is concerned, I mean, if there is essentially whatever you would call it as a product, either a technical issue where the product is not functioning as it's supposed to, or there's an outage or some other issues, then they get funneled to the support team. And having a strong support mechanism directly to the customers is important to kind of make that happen. And obviously, customer success teams are involved and are being informed as the support team is working on a particular issue, but they don't necessarily need to drive the whole support issue itself. The support team can then take it on and drive it while they're informing both the customer success team and the involved account team, depending on which team and particular business unit was involved.
Awesome. Thank you. And then a couple of questions just on more of an organizational structure standpoint. So the first one is, what kind of coverage does customer success need? Is it account-based? Is it rep-based? How does that scale across the number of accounts you have? How do you think about that piece of it? And
sure. And these slides will be available for the audience. So if you just, and when I showed customer success at scale, there was a pyramid there, and there were some tiers in there. So if you, that's how we've done it. So we've done it two ways. One is generally we have a much deeper map of what customer success needs to achieve in those accounts, and how much time just in general it takes depending on the size of that account. So every 100K of book of business that the customer success team is managing, how long does it take to actually onboard that particular book of business, and how long does it take on an ongoing basis to service that book of business, right? You're running health checks, you're doing weekly or biweekly meetings, or running QBRs, you're probably running some workshops and so on and so forth. So, depending on your business, measuring those, at least having some guesstimates around how long those two buckets take, which is onboarding and servicing, is important. And then build a capacity model based on that. And then the capacity model can be twofold. One is, it is overall book of business that at least in the named tier, which is your top echelon of customers, you do want to have a dollar-based book of business type of assignment, because there you could just have one account that's giving you high seven figures, and you just maybe want to dedicate one whole person to that, right? So in the big sort of over a certain ARR threshold, you might want to think about a dollar based book of business assignment model. In your pooled model, you might want to think about a number of account based model, right? Because that's a pooled bucket, right, where you're not essentially assigning a named person to a particular account, but it's a pool of resources. They're probably handling 40, 50 accounts, one person, right? But it's very low touch, and a lot of the stuff is being done through self-service. So so just to, upshot would be, in the pool model, think about number of accounts. In the top tier, think about book of business. But more importantly, think about the number of activities that are there in each bucket, and build a proper capacity model for that.
Got it. Helpful. And so that's the question on how to build out the actual organization. But then now thinking about up leveling it to where exactly customer success fits. How do you think about the reporting structure of customer success as a whole? When should it report to sales? When does it report directly to the CEO? How does it follow within product? Where in the org chart do you think customer success falls for you guys? And then
Yep.
even as you're building out your business?
Look, I mean, I think it's a maturity cycle over time, right? So when the company is young, in its early stages in terms of actually selling and establishing their book of business, it is okay for customer success to be collapsed inside the overall go-to-market function inside sales. But over time, it is important to think about customer success as its own standalone function. And the primary reason is that um, you want to think about optimizing both long term and short term. And a very successful sales team is always thinking about the immediate quarter at hand, and maybe the next quarter, right? So essentially, you want to have a counter to that, which is your customer success team that is there optimizing the long term success of the account, right? And so having them as independent functions over time kind of helps with that counterbalance of making sure that, while your sales team is going and thinking about what do we do in this quarter, how do we make the numbers for the next quarter, and so on and so forth, you're not basically driving your whole investment strategy in customer success just to optimize for the immediate or the next quarter, but you're thinking about long term. So like having that balance is important. Now that balance can be achieved, right, through a different org structure as well. My point is that regardless of what you think about reporting structure, two things are very important. One is you have to maintain that balance. So like you have to make sure that enough metrics and incentives are there on both sides to make sure the customer success resources are firewalled from being moved from one account to another once the quarter is done, right? So like, I mean, the most extreme example could be, you're trying to drive a big deal in a particular customer account for this quarter. You assign all the resources to that particular account or that set of accounts. Once that deal was closed, you moved them, and now you're moving them to a different set of customers that you're focused on closing in the next quarter, right? Like that's bad, right, from a customer success perspective. So like, as long as there's a counterbalance over there, and there are enough metrics that I mentioned that are being driven collaboratively, between the sales and the CS team, I think you can achieve success. And then the org structure is really, sometimes also dependent on kind of the type of people you're going to hire, and what does it take you as a company to attract them.
Awesome. And then last quick one, just on the org side, how early in a company building cycle do you think about building out a customer success organization? Is it after the first customer, 5 customers, 10 customers? What do you think? When do you think is the right time to start thinking about it?
Look, I mean, I think that the first phase of any company is proving out the product market fit. I don't think you need a lot of investments immediately as a separate function in that, because at that time your company is small enough where your whole company is actually in customer success in some sense, because you're trying to prove the product market fit, and every engineer, every leader, every person you have is kind of trying to make those accounts successful. I think once that is done, right, which is that you've proven a product market fit, and now as a business you think that you've identified the addressable market, you have a very specific set of buyers, right, or personas that you're going after, and that product market fit and those use cases are well defined and understood, and now you're ready to actually double down on sales, right, and go to market in general. That's when I would think about investing in customer success. So, like, for me, that it goes in conjunction or hand in hand with how much fuel you're adding into the go to market overall. So if you're adding more fuel into the sales teams, right, where you now are confident that you have identified the target buyer, and you just want to double down on that and accelerate, that's when I would start then also thinking about customer success, because it takes time to hire the right people. It takes time to build these programs. So not investing in customer success when you're doubling down on sales can actually create a debt for you that you have to then catch up on. So hopefully that answers the question. Make it correlated with your sales growth.
Perfect. And then maybe last question. There are a couple of questions on KPIs, which I think I can combine into one. So how much of the customer success function is fully data driven versus ad hoc? And then on top of that, for the portion that is data driven, how often are you revising those targets that you use to measure the customer success KPIs? And then there's a question on what tools are you using to actually do that? So I think you could probably take that all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm an engineer at heart, so maybe I'm just biased, but for me, like, without data, nothing works. And so regardless of what function you are in, regardless of how subjective and how much your customers like you, or how much the internal functions like you have to be able to measure that and correlate that and quantify that eventually, and tie that to some kind of top line or bottom line metric that the company is driving. So, like, I just don't think anything works without data. So that's, like, the first part of the question. I do think focus is really important. So instead of having 30 metrics that you're trying to track and measure at the same time, have 5 or 6 that you can actually think about that are leading indicators. Because if you make the leading indicator successful, like, for example, if your customers are consuming all of their contract, and that consumption that you're actually, which we call as usage, is being tracked carefully, and that's what you're setting your goals on, you will get your renewals, you will get your net retention. I mean, that's just an outcome or a byproduct of driving the right consumption. Similarly, if you're well established in the account, right, and you've built the right champions, you've won the architecture, right, then the stickiness measure is also kind of done, right? Then you are less at a threat in terms of losing a renewal because some champion left, right? So track leading indicators, focus on less metrics, right? Absolutely have a way to measure everything that you are investing in. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think this was the last part of the question, which is how often do you revise them? We at least plan for the metrics or the OKRs that we are driving on an annual basis, but then they're revised, in the first half and the second half, and then we report on them quarterly, right? So, like, you report on them quarterly, plan once a year. If you're a very, very fast growing business, maybe some of those OKRs become irrelevant in 6 months, and you might want to revise them. But you don't want your teams to be churning through what they need to focus on every quarter, right? So at least keep a couple of quarters of consistency in those metrics and planning, and then keep reporting on those. I think visibility and making sure that you have high visibility and accuracy in terms of reporting on that is really, really important.
Awesome. I think you did manage to get through all of them, so that was impressive work. Thank you so much for joining us, Hatim.
Yeah, no, likewise. Thank you so much. And, feel free to, if there are questions offline, I'm happy to answer them. The slides will be available. Hopefully this was helpful. And thanks again for the opportunity.